Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The question has lingered over American voters ever since then-candidate Ronald Reagan posed it as a means to bludgeon the floundering President Jimmy Carter in their debate just days before the 1980 election. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It caused wavering citizens to think hard. A tight race broke open in the final days, and Reagan won a landslide victory. And yet, when that famous better off question was asked to voters 4 years later in 1984, just 44% of people answered that their lives had improved. Nevertheless, Reagan was reelected with a second overwhelming victory. When Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama followed on with their own two-term administrations, they all similarly won re-election, with less than 50% of Americans saying they were better off than they were when the first term began. But now comes a recent Gallup poll providing a staggering conclusion entirely at odds with an endless string of polls depicting Trump as an all but certain loser on November 3rd or thereafter. Even in the midst of a pandemic, 56% of the American people say they are better off than they were 4 years ago, while just 32% say their lives have gotten worse. When you stop to consider the disparity between the 56% better off figure and the roughly 44% that represents both Trump's job approval and his average support against Biden in the elite polls, something doesn't add up. One political truism that stood the test of time due to immutable human nature is that people do not vote against their own interests. Could it be that the dozen-point differential between 56 and 44% is largely comprised of those now famous shy Trump voters who understandably don't wish to share their political views with anyone? Could Trump actually cause millions of people to vote against their own improved quality of life strictly because of his personality? Of course, we need to consider the accuracy, or more precisely, the lack thereof, of the same mainstream polls which 4 years ago trumpeted a lead for Hillary Clinton that's looking more similar by the day to the lead Biden is showing this time around. In 2016, the polls told us that Hillary led in virtually every swing state on election eve, and yet she lost multiple states she was predicted to win and was defeated decisively by Trump in the Electoral College. The pollsters broadly admitted after that election that their methodology was broken, yet they've provided no evidence that they have since changed their ways. Thus, there's no good reason to believe they've become reliable again in the even more radically polarized political climate of 2020. But that's not all. There are other signs which belie what the pollsters have been reporting. The enthusiasm gap between the two candidates is more like a gaping chasm, with the president consistently registering 20 or more points ahead of his feckless challenger. In most polls, a majority of Biden supporters say they're voting against Trump rather than for Biden. And surveys over time have shown that most people vote for a candidate, not against one. Trump is playing to crowds of many thousand, and Biden often to gatherings in the double digits on those occasions from time to time where he doesn't place a lid on his campaign's activities early in the day. And Biden is apparently not even trying to generate enthusiasm. He's essentially put a lid on his entire campaign, believing the fact that he is not Donald Trump will be enough, and that running out the clock and freezing the ball will lead to victory. But rarely, if ever, has the candidate that generates the most enthusiasm lost a presidential election, especially when that enthusiasm gap is wide. The backers of Reagan, Bush 43, Obama, and Trump in 2016 were clearly more enthusiastic about their candidate than were their opponents. Then there's the matter of voter registration. It's historically been a reliable indicator of what direction the electorate is headed. The GOP has been gaining voter registration since 2016, while the Democrats' voter rolls have been reduced. In the 67 counties of arguably the most crucial swing state in the election, Pennsylvania, 59 of those 67 have seen a net gain of Republican voters since Trump's election. That's 88% of the counties in the Keystone State. A similar GOP pickup has occurred in North Carolina, while other battlegrounds have seen at least a decrease in the Democrats' registration advantage. It's also worth examining the numbers so far from early voting, which was unquestionably supposed to favor the Democrats and led to loud calls from Trump and Republicans to stop the widespread distribution of unsolicited ballots. And yet, with the information we have now, the information now available, the Democrats' expected advantage of well over 2-1 in early voting at mail-in ballots has not materialized as they had expected at this point. With close to a third of the electorate having already voted, some battleground states such as North Carolina show a surprising number of GOP early voters in what, by all accounts, is a heavy turnout across the country. Even discounting any effect from the final debate or the growing scandal surrounding the enrichment of the Bidens by foreign actors, the reality on the ground may well be clashing with widespread predictions of a Trump defeat. When you combine the unreliability of the polls in the last election with the results of the "are you better off" question, the massive enthusiasm gap, and the pickup in GOP registration, some of the most significant metrics by which past presidential campaigns were almost universally judged, it would be folly for Democrats to believe that this race is over.
Extra, read all about it.
Election 2020 Big Bottom Flash Reports are coming. On election night, at the bottom of every hour, LibertyNation.com will give you Election Night 2020, 90 seconds at a time, with our Big Bottom Flash Reports. You'll get the drop with our one-stop shop. Tune into LibertyNation.com on election night for our Big Bottom Flash Reports at the bottom of every hour. LibertyNation.com.